All right, I think we're gonna get started. Okay, now we had our little, I had my sugar boost, so I'm ready to go. We are going to spend this next little bit of time doing some writing and doing some discussing of the samples that we sent out to you yesterday. I think this is the best way to really kind of figure out what it is that makes proposals work and what particular writing strategies we should keep in mind when we're drafting some of our own. To get us into the writing mindset, I have one little bit of reflective writing I would like you to do. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes just to kind of take a deep breath, think a little bit about what it is you would like to see funded. Maybe you're in the middle of something, maybe you're working towards a goal, but we want to figure out, what is it that you would like to get funding for? And I'd like you to consider the following questions. What value would your research add to the academic field? So like, what's the imperative? What is it that we're trying to kind of create through this project? How is your research going to positively impact the community outside of academia? So what are some of those broader impacts? What are the most significant impacts of your research? And how can you measure them? Now, I'm going to give you time just to kind of get some thoughts down, try and see if you can hit all four, kind of think a little bit more broadly, like what is that big overarching elevator pitch of significance you would provide in your grant? All right, I'm going to let you get started. I'm going to give you about 1 more minute to finish capturing those last thoughts. Okay, I'm going to stop you there. Okay, next what we're going to do is a little trial by fire. I would like you to turn to a partner so you can pair up for this little exercise. And I would like you to take 30 seconds or less to explain what you just wrote down to that other person. And the additional challenge here is I don't want you looking at the notes you just produced. I want you to really kind of get down to the essentials and explain to that person why should your ideas be funded. Okay, so find a partner, give yourselves the 30-second elevator pitch and you can jump in. All right, you want to wrap up your discussions? All right, how'd that feel? There's a lot of awesome ideas that deserve funding in this room. So I really want you to put yourselves in these moments. This is one of the first ways to kind of get a start on what ultimately ends up in your grant. It seems kind of, seems kind of loose and we're not really sure, but academics aren't necessarily good at being simple, and really kind of getting down to the basics and the fundamentals of the messages that, matter inside their research. And so give yourselves very strictly defined moments where you have to capture answers to questions like this, where you tell people, 30 seconds, why should I be funded? This can really help you to form the basis of the big themes of your narrative, the big themes of your abstract, because we really want to be able to pinpoint this very specifically inside a multi-page grant. Okay, so that's getting us started for today, but now we're going to actually look at those samples. So I've asked, for the distribution of those 2 sample NSF, and I'm picking on NSF because they're the easiest grants to locate and to collect. But those of you who aren't working inside the particular grant can use these samples as a guide for what writing should be looking like, or what it could look like. So what I'm going to have us do for the next while is I'm going to let you read through those 2 grants. And you don't have to get through the whole thing. I think everything up to, there's like a reference list usually before you're done, that PDF. That is the bulk of the narrative in there. I would love for everybody to take a really close read at the first page of each one. That's the summary of each proposal. And then I would like you to skim, kind of glance through the remaining content of the narrative. Our goals today are going to be answers to the following questions, but also any, additional comments that you have about what you're observing in these grant samples. So what I would like you to be on the lookout for: what moves do these writers make to help guide a non-expert through the research? So how are you, as likely a non-expert, learning about this topic? How are they helping you through that process? How does the writer demonstrate the exigence of their project? So do they identify a gap that needs to be addressed, a pressing problem, a significance of their research that is responding to a need that they have actually told you about? So how do they do that? Where do they do that? How does the writer demonstrate that they are the correct person to conduct this research? Again, we want to be able to kind of pinpoint moments in the grant where this is happening. What design aspects do you notice that improve the readability of the document? So look for ways where you feel like the flow seemed really great. Any moments where you had to stop, go back and read again. That's a sign that there's something missing. We're missing connections. Anything you feel is helping you to follow along. And then kind of capturing all the other type of stuff. What are some strengths you notice about the proposal overall? What type of strategies for good argument and rhetorical devices do we see happening that maybe you wouldn't use? Because the other thing I want us to think about is that not every grant proposal looks exactly the same. And so we want to think about ways that we can apply the things we're seeing in the grant, or maybe things that we should avoid too. Okay. Anything else you observe and have questions about, I will be circulating. I'm anticipating to kind of get really into these grants. You're going to need about maybe half an hour. I'm going to let you talk with some people around you. I think this is great to discuss with others. Feel free to kind of make notes, kind of gather your thoughts, and we will regroup before we finish today's discussion to talk about some of the things you're seeing. Okay, I'm going to let you get started. Just checking in, and so that we're kind of keeping to our timeline today. If you've already had a chance to read those two kind of summary pages and are starting to go through the details of the other parts of the grant, this is a good time to start chatting with other people. I think one of the components of your conversation that really matters here is the comparison, that there are different things happening inside these two documents, and we kind of want to pinpoint how that's impacting your perception of the writing. So chat with a partner, chat with a couple of people, talk about your reactions. We'll take another little stretch of time for you to do so, and then we're going to talk about it all together. Do people feel ready to talk about your reactions all together, just to have a more of a group conversation? I'm hearing some good discussion happening, but I'd love to kind of start bringing it together. Does that sound good? Okay. I'm going to tag these examples biodiversity and big data rather than 1 and 2. And then that way, if we want to reference one or the other, we know which one we're talking about, because I probably won't remember the numbers accurately myself. Those of you who read on your smartphones, remember that experience. This is what many of your reviewers are going to do that first time through, or when they're kind of reminding themselves before those decisions, that quick reference look at something. Picture your document on that small screen and think about what qualities make it readable and easy to kind of skim through. So that's something that I recommend too when you're doing your drafting, is take a look at it in a few different formats. Okay, I don't really have a particular direction other than we can follow kind of the pattern of these questions and think about your findings. But I'm interested in your impressions. Like, if you had to pick one, let's say they happen to be competing for the same amount of money, or within the same stream, Which one do you prefer? So show of hands for biodiversity. Who likes that one better? Okay. And then just to kind of see, and then who likes big data? Okay. Okay. So I want us to think about why, sort of why we have these preferences, what about it makes it easier to read. Maybe we find the content more interesting, but I'd like us to focus on some writing strategies. So first of all, what moves, what strategies did the writers use to help you feel more comfortable as a non-expert going through the document? Did you happen to notice anything that you found effective? Who'd like to join or start us off? Yes, I think that's helpful. Biodiversity includes a lot of very specific terminology. The first time that term is mentioned, you have those brief little captures or definitions, and that can be really helpful. Sometimes it's hard to tell which terms need that amount of definition or description. So this is where you ask others, people who aren't familiar, especially for a term that you feel is crucial. Do I need to tell you more about this? And that's a good strategy. Other grants sometimes include brief little keys at the beginning, give you a quick little rundown of the main terminology that you need to know. So that's another way to do this. But if you have a term here and there, including that parenthetical definition can be really helpful. Yeah, anything else that you found made you kind of a little bit more comfortable with the content because you're a non-expert? Mm-hmm.
First sentence itself says the roadblock gap in the research. It clearly goes to the point.
Perfect.
So the second one is it's the second paragraph where the gap is, the roadblock is.
Right. And I think especially on that first page, on that summary, panelists and reviewers, they're looking for keywords so that even if they aren't fully familiar with the content, it's paired with words that are telling them to pay attention for certain things. And so a word like gap or challenge or problem is going to hone them in on details that they really need to pay attention to. So even if I don't have a full handle on this topic, you're trying to tell me where the really important details are. And so both of these documents do try and do that, although I agree that one does it a little bit earlier than the other. So that helps readers feel more comfortable with the content and how it's connected to the goals of the project overall. How about, let's kind of bring that second question into play. Particular strategies beyond the one we just discussed that are helping these writers describe their problem in more detail, giving you a sense of the gap or the need they're going to address. There's a lot of that discussion on the first page of both of these grant proposals. So how are they achieving that? What did you notice? Mm-hmm. Both sets of writing are trying to demonstrate a need that needs addressing. That's something you want to be very direct about. And so both documents say, the big challenge of this topic, or we do not yet have this mechanism in place in order to explore these issues. They both mention that fairly early on. In the big data example on that first page, it comes in those first couple of paragraphs. In the biodiversity one, it comes kind of right away. It is difficult to do this. So the challenge is immediately there as a way to kind of jump you into sort of the issue that this project is trying to face. All this to say that the gap of your project should be expressed early. Even if you are trying to build context, you're trying to provide background information, you're trying to catch people up on your topic, we still need to get to that challenge quickly if we can, particularly on this first page. And that can be a struggle for a lot of writers because, again, we're trying to figure out how much information that outside reader needs. But I think both proposals accomplish kind of a quick little context bit of discussion at the beginning with then kind of a clear statement of what they need to address within that area, within that field. And then looking kind of towards the proposal in general, if we look through kind of the narrative, I know you just kind of skimmed this. Were there other ways, other strategies you observed that help writers expand on and talk about the problem in more detail? What did you notice? I can jump in with a comment on this one, that this is often where your skills for literature review can come back into play, that you use the inside of the narrative, the project description, to expand on and discuss the research field that your particular topic exists in. Again, the goal has to be to show that past work has not yet done what you are saying that you're going to do, or hasn't done it in the particular way. And you would have the conversation that also kind of situates your particular goal inside that larger conversation taking place. So both of these documents have kind of an expanded literature review. We talk about the topic, why it matters, and we provide more background information that helps people to understand those goals. Now, what about the third question here? What we also need to be able to see is that the writers themselves have the capability of completing the research. So were there any moments in the documents that you read where you feel like they were trying to demonstrate their own capability and credibility? Have a look. That's right. So biodiversity one mentions mentors, people they are working with and studying with. So this is a very common technique to reference people you have who are influential in your field, show that they're part of the project, they're working with you. If you're an early career grant writer, that you have oversight from other people involved. Other people often reference previous publications or other types of work that has been done by them in the field to show that there has been acknowledgement from their field that their work has value and that it is, it upholds peer review type standards. So these types of things happen often very directly. You provide these comments somewhere that talk about sort of how capable you are, that you have adequate lab space, that you have adequate people to help you with the project here on campus. You might also notice, I believe both grants refer to their university's resources, that sometimes you alone are not sufficient enough to kind of carry out your projects. And so you want to have conversations inside your document about how your university will support you, that you have enough resources to carry out the project or access to people who can give you some of those resources. Now let's talk about, I'm going to kind of throw all three of those final questions together because this is where we really want to think about the writing itself. What about the writing style, design, formatting do you feel is helping you to read through these documents or hindering you as well? Because I would say that both could be improved. So what did you think? Who would like to chat about that? Mm-hmm. So short paragraphs tend to be a lot better. We don't want to kind of have blocks and blocks of text. I would say that the big data narrative, you'll notice just doing a visual comparison of the two, doesn't have a lot of formatting that kind of breaks things up evenly. So even if there are small paragraphs, if you're just taking a glance at it, it looks like one big block of text. So small adjustments to the formatting, adding spaces between things can be really, really helpful. You will also notice, I think, that the biodiversity document breaks up paragraphs into other types of formatting too. There are lots of additional bolding, numbered features, lists. And so sometimes writers feel like they can't break from sentence by sentence structure to get their ideas across, but oftentimes it's a great way to draw attention to certain things that matter. And so, for example, the research plan of the biodiversity document has 3 clear, visible, bolded objectives written out like a list. A lot of writers would have just kept that inside a paragraph and maybe still numbered them. But this particular formatting helps those things to be much more visible. It helps to break up the page and make it easier to see. Also just provides, a break from the long blocks of text. This is key information, and so it's given that treatment inside the document as well. Yeah, what else did you notice? Things that you liked, things you didn't like, questions that you had about what you can do with the writing? Mm-hmm.
I am a very visual person, so
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the tables and the graphics, not only because it explains things more clearly, but also gives me a break from all of it. So yes, I really like that.
Absolutely. And graphics are often encouraged in these documents. We forget that we can include them. They want to have something that can help them understand complex concepts and terminology. So feel free to use figures, graphics, anything that is helpful at kind of amplifying what's in the text. It shouldn't be there just for the sake of it. Otherwise, it's taking up space. But if it helps to further explain a topic, an aspect of your research that is already showing some type of data or significance, these things can be incredibly valuable. The thing to keep in mind with any graphic is that it needs to be interpretable by somebody who has no experience with that particular field. And so they should be simple enough, and they could be explained with a quick caption beneath the image itself. It needs to be something that doesn't take a lot of time to understand. And so if you have a graphic and it works well with your text, include it. Refer to it in the text as well, see figure 1, so that people can see how the text and the imagery work together. What other comments or feedback do you have? Things that were working? Yes.
The question that came to mind for me regarding both was the statement in reference to the long-term outcomes. And so as a non-expert, something that really draws me into the text is if I see, okay, 10 years down the road, how is this going to impact society or policy or even, me as a layman just walking down the street. That engages me, gets me excited and able to get behind what they're doing. And so I guess I can see it, maybe I missed it, but if they're where you recommend including that long-term outcomes statement, or should there be one?
I'm not sure if I have an exact answer to that question. So where do we talk about long-term impacts? I think I'll say first, the challenge of long-term impacts is that they are often hard to measure. And so if they are the only thing we focus on in the first, the summary, the page, those types of things, I as a reviewer would take issue with that unless it's something that is very specifically measurable. I could see it being mentioned alongside short-term impacts, but otherwise, perhaps in the larger narrative, when I have more space in a section, for example, in NSF, where I talk about broader impacts or results, I might kind of keep going and kind of envision where these immediate impacts could then take me down the road, if that makes sense. I don't know if others have some commentary on that. Yeah. The very end. Yeah.
You want a strong question finish.
Mm-hmm.
That's the place where you can put that one. Because you kind of recapitulate what you said about, this is my objectives, this is what I'm going to do to achieve them, and this could lead to.
Yeah. From a writer's perspective, that makes a lot of sense to end this way, because we often struggle, we're usually on a specific point. How do I finish up without restating everything I've just talked about? And so one way to do that is to broaden out, think of the impacts, think of where this could take you. And so, yeah, I think as a conclusion mechanism, it works really well. Mm-hmm. Any other questions, comments? I'm going to walk you through. Oh, yes. Yes.
I guess I noticed in this biodiversity one that it seemed like a
Sure.
So I wish maybe we could discuss person really putting attention to detail on this.
It can certainly impact credibility, like the level of accuracy and of formatting, of grammatical errors, of things like that. Are these things going to make or break that proposal that seems to be going into that high priority category? Perhaps not, but you never know who is reading on the other side. We might have you on a reviewer panel who's like, this is driving me crazy. And so give yourself some time to get help for these things too. A lot of the times it's up to you to put those final formatting details together. And so if you ever feel shaky, get some help. Make sure it's consistent. Make sure it is checked for accuracy. I don't think anybody's going to be checking for like precise commas inside a citation necessarily, but they might notice when one is formatted differently than the other. So we want to be on the lookout for that. So I'm going to talk through, just to kind of wrap up our conversation, some other strategies that I've observed going through these documents. I will say that both of these proposals were funded. The biodiversity proposal, I believe, initially went into the high priority category. It's like, we like this, and the feedback did say this was nicely written, we could understand this. Big data also funded, I believe it went into the medium category. Looking through the feedback from the reviewer panel, there were a lot of questions about some of the specifics of the plan, of the research. It's hard to say whether it was purely based on the clarity of the writing, but these seem to be questions that were answered in the text. They were just a little bit hard to find. And so this is something that I think is worth addressing. But overall, if we're looking at the summaries of these two documents, you'll notice right away that there is a different way that writers have prioritized the type of content. The overview for big data is long. It's one of the longer overviews I've seen on a document, whereas the other writer kind of gives fairly equal treatment. Both of them are complete. I would say the biodiversity overview gets right to the heart of the matter, provides a little bit of background about the problem, and then is very clear about where their ideas begin. And so I see keywords. My overarching research goal is to address 3 limiting factors. So being able to identify numerically whenever you can, things like goals, plans, outcomes can be really helpful. As readers, we're trained to look for these things and to notice and to recognize, I need to learn 3 things from this paragraph or from this sentence. If we use broader language, which is what the big data one does a little bit here, it says one goal of this project is to develop this. Another goal is mentioned down the line of this project is to develop a matrix. This language is still, we can see it, it's clear and it's direct, but the biodiversity one is more numerically defined, which is a little bit easier on the brain when we're trying to figure out how much we need to process. And so the writer for the biodiversity is able to kind of hone in on specifics that can be listed out, which readers tend to appreciate. Both of the documents address intellectual merit in slightly different ways. They try again to focus on identifying the problem that, if the research is funded, can impact the broader community, impacts their field, could potentially impact other fields as well and go beyond. And then broader impacts are then discussed a little bit more explicitly. Notice that for both documents, they are very clearly measurable right away in the summary. They make specific reference to particular outlets, particular types of communities that will benefit from the research. They do so in a way that you can measure impact right away. They provide more detail in the remaining parts of the proposal, but it's kind of giving more depth to what's already been discussed here. And so clear, measurable objectives need to be identified in the summary. They need to have specifics. Both documents kind of follow some patterns that you can aim for in your paragraph design. Sometimes when you have 15 pages to work with, it's really hard to think about how you can structure your ideas in a way that makes it easy to read. So something I observe in the big data summary that is carried through in other parts of the narrative is a very clear structure of paragraph design. So inside the overview, for example, One paragraph, the second paragraph, focuses on the challenge. Here's the problem. Here's sort of some information about the topic that I want you to understand. I'm going to connect that to a very specific goal. So it goes from challenge to a goal or an answer to that challenge. And then it goes back and follows that pattern again. Here is a challenge. Here is how I will address it. So you can carry out this type of pattern in a few different ways in your proposal. Make sure that when you provide background information, so you have a paragraph or two that discusses some details about your particular area of research, it's followed up with a particular response to what you're going to do with that. It's clear, with this research, I will explore, I will investigate, I will do these things. Whenever you have discussion of any potential things you'll have to consider in the practical aspects of your work, you describe the challenge, you connect back to what you will do to overcome it. And so it's kind of a claim, discussion, evidence kind of style. If we're making an argument in our narrative that we can do this, we need to make sure that every piece of information connects back to what you will do with that. And I think both documents do it fairly well. Just kind of giving you some more details of what that looks like. I'm going to close in on the biodiversity one for a little bit. If you kind of glance through the first few pages of their narrative, let's see. We have lots of background information. We have really nice headings that describe the particular types of content. Then we start getting into the research plan and the methodology. Notice that every paragraph, or just about, inside the methods and beyond, starts with I and is formulated on a verb. I will use, I will simulate, I will generate, I will expect my results to, I will modify. I believe this writer was fairly intentional that way, that it was a way to use the topic sentence to focus in on a particular task or area of their work and how it related to their goals, and to find a nice parameter for the discussion that kept things tied to, things they actually were going to accomplish rather than talking about the topic more broadly. Topic sentences are going to have a lot of power in these documents in the same way that they do in a lot of types of writing. They tell readers very specifically what paragraphs will accomplish, but I think writers can also take advantage of the opportunity to use that first sentence to talk about what they will do, what they will contribute, what their work will accomplish. And so it can be really valuable at tying you as the researcher to the outcomes of your project. That helps to establish credibility, shows that you have specific actions you intend to accomplish. And then from a writing perspective, just gives a nice set of parameters around one paragraph, which should just be focused on a couple of things at a time. Both documents have a lot of patterns for design. They make use of bolding, numbered lists, bullet lists, things like that. I encourage you to do a lot of that as much as you can. Use the visual design of the document to preview information for people. And so instead of sticking to broad headings, like only using introduction, broader impacts, things that we expect to see, more headings that are specific to your content can be really helpful. Both documents, I think, do that fairly effectively. We can pinpoint every location where a topic shifts into something different. Bolding often symbolizes something important that we should look at. So you can definitely employ that. Do it for very specific reasons and try and do it sparingly, because then otherwise you lose the impact. Lists, bullet descriptions are very helpful for walking people through a sequence of things that work well, kind of differentiated. So a list of research outcomes, a list of strategies, a list of particular elements of outcomes that you want to identify specifically. Containing lots of detail like that inside a paragraph is challenging. And so other types of visual strategies can make those things easier to process. Overall, I chose both of these documents because I think it's nice to see when things are successful. And I think both documents have some room to grow and to be better. all of you are going to be kind of working through documents like this and struggling to feel like, you know, when is it done? When is it going to meet those requirements? So the way we do that is we read, we look at examples, we think about what works and how we react as a reader. We practice, we show as many people as possible how our writing looks in various stages. And as long as we are working towards those questions outlined in our grant program, as long as we are speaking to and responding to those questions, our writing will be on track. But overall, I think it's going to take a lot more time than most people think it does. Start early, plan, and capture all of the notes that you are taking now to utilize for those final versions of your grants. And I wish you every success. To wrap up our discussion though today, are there any lingering questions about writing the documents of your proposals? Yes.
So I realized that the big data was using and maybe it was to me personally.
Mm-hmm.
So what's the take on that? You think that they should be more the technology we're using, and if they should, how much more, you know, like how can we really balance that? Crazy. Yes. How much more should we do?
That's tricky. I think, again, not coming from inside that field, a lot of that is foreign, and I'll skip the longer sections where they're walking through code or equations. However, you are going to have reviewers on your panel who know how to do these things, who are very familiar and are looking for things that can be replicable. And so I think there is value in including things that are crucial to your methodology. I feel like there was a lot of that in this document and probably too much. Whether methodology can be explained by providing definitions might be another thing that I think the writer tried to anticipate and provide definitions of different types of things inside big data discussions. Like, we try this, this is the technology we have available. But I think there came a moment where they're like, I just got to show you how this is going to work. So yeah, I don't have a question, but I think you're right to wonder as an outside reader, is this important? Do I need to know? I just keep going back to that panel reviewer who is inside the field and who does need that information. I don't know if there are other perspectives on this. It's a tough one. And so my answer is essentially ask the people in your field, is this common for me to write out in this way? Do I need to explain certain things, or can I expect that my panelists have at least a basic understanding of my field? That's really where I think you'll get a better perspective, if that makes sense. So I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question, but I think it does vary. It's going to vary by field. How much do I need to explain? Mm-hmm. All right, yes.
So is it a good idea to include limitations of the work?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
Is it a good idea to include the limitations of the work?
What do you mean by limitations?
Sometimes you cannot do, for example, you try to model the code and you cannot do due to the computing powers.
I think it's important to be clear about what you can accomplish. I think by setting the parameters around your research outcomes and your goals, you might not have to acknowledge that directly, in that you're saying, like, whatever you're defining is out here. It's outside the box of the work that you have identified. I think it's important to be honest as well, though, that if there are challenges in the way you're going to complete the project, if there's challenges with the field or the questions you're asking, if you have a plan to work through that at this stage of the work, I think that is what panelists are looking for. We know that things aren't going to go perfectly, or that there are limitations to certain aspects of your work. What they would be fearful of is language that doesn't address that at all, or just kind of blankly says, oh, you know, like, it'll be fine, or I'll overcome it. They say, no, how are you going to work through that? How are you going to overcome that particular issue? Does that answer your question? Okay. Yes.
For each, there are some proposal, how many review, need?
I don't know our numbers anymore. Do you? How many people are we typically reading per proposal? How many reviewers are typically on a panel now?
Depends on the panel and it depends on the agency.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna talk some about.
Okay.
that, and we might not talk about it.
Okay, that's coming up. Mm-hmm.
For the review, have different opinions about the same proposal, so you should know what they do.
That's up to the panel manager. I've had things reviewed where I've had one that was less favorable review than others, but it depends on what's the overall strength and how the whole section of stuff that the panel is looking at falls out. So, I mean, one bad review doesn't have to kill you.
So with the review, no my information.
Yes, they will know who you are, but it is, they have to keep that confidential. They can't go and talk about that, so.
I think this is a good time for me to pass the torch, but thank you for listening. Keep reading and let us know at the Writing Center if we can help you at any stage along the way. Thank you.
Oh. So I get the exciting topic of budgets and budget justifications. My name's Ann Ulmer, and I'm a grant specialist in the College of Ag. I have been working with grant submissions for probably about 15 years now. So this is kind of a daily occurrence for me. I find when I work with faculty doing budgets, there's two kinds of faculty. There's those who despise the budget. You say budget and like life kind of drains out of them. And there's others that you say a budget and they've really thought through it and they know what they need and how they're going to go about the project, what they need, and everything that they're going to use. So we will talk a little bit today. Let's see. We'll start off by talking about what is a budget. It's just a financial plan of your proposed work. I'm going to do this study and I expect it to cost this amount of money. Your budget identifies expenses that you expect to incur, and this is a very important point. They have to be directly related to the project and they have to occur during the project period. So if you've collected data prior to working on the project, we can't charge that. If it's something that's going to happen after the project, we typically can't include that. So we're just looking at what expenses we have during the performance period that grant will cover. It gives the sponsor a picture of the project cost. And it's another opportunity to help you review, understand what you're trying to do. So we get the summary, which is just kind of a quick glance that you were talking about. We get the narrative, which is 15 to 20 pages, usually to tell reviewers what you're going to do. And then you get another opportunity in the budget to tell the panel what you want to do, how you're going to do it, how much have you thought through this. So it's just another opportunity to show the review panel you've thought about this, you've planned for this, and this is another reason why you think it will work or how it will work. An important question, why develop a budget? Well, the sponsor requires it, the university requires it. It helps determine if the scope matches the call. Dr. Montalone was talking earlier. We have these great ideas and we want to solve this huge problem, and it's going to take 2 graduate students and 2 months of summertime and $30,000 worth of supplies. And we put that in a budget and we realize, what's $1 million project? And this allows for $300,000. So now what are we going to pare this down to? So we have this overarching goal of what we want to do, but we can only fund about 1/3 of that. So what piece can we break off based on this budget and fit into this call? And so we have to kind of, it's okay to have a great idea that's going to cost $3 million, but you also have to be able to, okay, here's a piece we can do for here, and here's a piece we can do here, and here's a piece we can do. And it all goes into this overarching goal of what your research plan is. And it's fine that it fits together. It's great that it fits together. But we also have to kind of be able to budget and fit that project with the budget and the scope into what the agency is asking about. And then it also serves as a blueprint for your spending. So if we have faculty members from different departments, when we do this budget, we can do budgets by departments or by colleges. And then there's at least something that you started up front that can say, no, this money's for supplies, you can't use it for travel. And so it also serves as a way to kind of hold you and your team accountable to that spending that you've proposed. Who uses the budget? Really, everyone does. The sponsor determines if it fits within their parameters of what they want. Your reviewers will look at it. If they say, wow, this is a great project, but there's no way that will happen for $300,000. Panelists know, or at least have a good idea of, based on the scope that you write, does this really fit? And if it doesn't fit, they're going to question, okay, well, you haven't really thought through this, or have you thought through this? And so you really have to justify and use the budget as a way to fit with your project. The research team uses it, you use it. Look at the feasibility, managing your funds. It's the basis for reporting to a sponsor. So if NSF gives us money, they don't just give us money. They give us money, and then we work with our accountants, we spend the money. Sponsored program accounting then also has to report back to NSF. So it's not like they just write you a check for $300,000 and say, go do your work. So we have to report on that. And so this budget is another way that we report that back to the agency. Your departmental accountants will use it. Amy talked earlier about once a month, she sends reports out to her faculty. Okay, here's what you proposed. Here's the money you've spent. Here's how much you have left. Are you spending about right? Are you way over in an area or another? And so it kind of can keep you on track of getting your research done. Pre-awards uses it. So when I work with a faculty on a grant proposal, we get the budget together and I send it over there. And we actually have a CPA over there who looks through the all of the budgets that go out. He will review the guidelines and say, does this fit? Does this make sense? Are these allowable costs? And so it's not just me saying, yeah, your budget looks good. We actually have an accountant that looks at it, because the last thing we want to do is put together a budget that will cause audit flags come down the road, because we also, our sponsored programs accounting, they help keep us on track. But then also we have people from the agencies that will come out and look at our books and say, okay, here's what you proposed, here's what you spent, tell me why, if we don't have it documented. So all of this is to help keep honest people honest. And the sponsored program accounting, they're all part of who uses the budget. When we talk about a budget, there's really two cost categories, and Amy touched on these very briefly earlier. There's the direct cost, the cost that can be specifically assigned to a project. We have a project, we need these samples run, and we're going to hire an undergraduate student to do that. That's a direct cost. But then we also have indirect cost, which those costs that we can't necessarily be associated with that, because when the student comes in, she turns on the light, but there's other people in there using the lights as well. And so those are indirect costs that we can't specifically put towards those projects or identify with those projects. And so here's just kind of a general list of direct cost personnel, the benefits that go along, a piece of equipment that we'll use, travel associated with that project, materials and supplies, publications. Lots of agencies, you know, they give you money and they want part of that is for the greater good of science. And so they want you to publish that research and to show others what you're doing. Sub-awards, so if you are doing part of the project and you have someone at another institution doing part of the project, we will issue them a sub-award. And then there's other costs that fall in there. Indirect cost, clerical personnel, the person that that works with the salary, the people that help at the front desk, lights, electricity, the custodial staff, the groundskeepers that help keep the university going, the library, pre-award services. I fall into this group by helping you guys get your proposals ready and out the door. So how do we come about calculating the indirect cost? And some people say it's the tax of doing research. Lots of faculty really grumble when we talk about including indirect cost, but it's a negotiated rate. There's this huge calculation that goes into determining what we can charge to federal agencies for indirect cost. Right now, that's negotiated every 4 years. Our last one was, it took a little bit longer to get negotiated. It was negotiated in 2017. It's good until 2020. So for on-campus research, 52% goes to indirect cost. Seems like a lot, but when you actually calculate it out, it costs much more than that to do research on campus. And so the 52% is what we negotiate with the federal government. So we show the federal government what it costs to do research. They look at that, and then we come up with a negotiated rate that they allow us to charge. And the base of that is modified total direct costs. So there's things that we don't pay indirects on, and this can get into the weeds for some of you. But that's what your grant specialist is here to help you figure out what's included and what's not. Some of those things that aren't included in modified total direct cost are tuition for graduate students. We don't charge indirect cost on those. If we buy a piece of equipment which is something that's over $5,000 and has a useful life of more than a year, we don't typically charge indirects on that. So there's a list on the website that includes everything that's not included. So here is just what a simplified budget looks like. We've got our salaries at the top, travel, supplies, tuition, and so there's a total direct cost. So our total direct cost is $115,000. Modified total direct cost is how we calculated the indirect cost. I probably should have put another line in there, which was the base, because we would take out the tuition from that 115, multiply that times 52%, and then get our total sponsor cost. So cost groups. So say we are a bread company. What are our direct costs for making bread? Wheat. So flour. So we could say every loaf of bread needs 2 cups of flour and the cost of that is X. Yes. What else is a direct cost of making a loaf or having a loaf of bread ready for the supermarket? The labor. So labor is actually, well, labor is one of those things with making bread. If they are dedicated to making that bread, yes, we can consider them a direct cost. Yeast, everything, yeast, the vitamins, eggs, bread, or the bread bag, all of those go into our direct cost. Utilities are part of overhead, because we use utilities to make the bread, but we also, there's lights on in the offices and there's lights on other places. And so utilities are actually considered an indirect cost. General counsel, everybody's got a lawyer these days. Those are all indirect cost. Electricity, packaging equipment, delivery truck, building. And so if we were bread making company, there would also be one more thing that would be on our balance sheet, and that's profit. But Kansas State University, like other universities, is a nonprofit. So we cannot make a profit. So when we are looking at a budget, we are required to charge the sponsor for only those costs associated with the project. So profit would be an unallowable cost. There are also other unallowable costs that we cannot charge to a grant. How do we know what's unallowable? The university has policies that tell us what's unallowable. I was looking at a call earlier. It says these things are unallowable. These things we won't pay for. Some organizations will not pay for equipment. That group will not pay for tuition. So if we have a grad student, they won't cover tuition that we would like to put on there. So the RFA will tell us uniform guidance. There's lots of places that tell us what costs are not allowable on proposals. A salary increase to work on the grant. So there are faculty members that think, well, I'm on a 12-month appointment. Why would I do a research project? Well, if I do this research project, then I'll just write in extra salary and I'll get a raise. That doesn't work. Alcohol, we can't typically buy alcohol on a proposal. When you're doing a budget for a grant, there's lots of it depends. Alcohol is one of those things that it depends. If you are doing research on alcohol, like on the effects of alcohol on mice, obviously it's included. However, if you want to take your team out to dinner and pay for drinks, that's not allowable. Expenses that have nothing to do with the project, yes. Yes. Correct. So university faculty are on contracts, and that contract stipulates what they get paid. There are faculty that are on 9-month appointments, and so they will write in salary to get paid over the summer, but it's one of those things that if they're not paid over the summer, they're not expected to work. However, though, if they write in salary for grant proposals, they're expected to work over the summer on those projects. Yes and no. There are arrangements that faculty have with the departments. You can write in salary if you are on a 12-month appointment, and then the department will reduce, the department can reduce those activities that you would be paid as part of your 12-month. So I do have 12-month faculty that will request a month of summer salary, and then we'll do that in lieu of other activities that they would typically do under their 12-month appointment. Does anybody else have any questions? I know I'm going through this quick. It's well, budgets are kind of hard to comprehend until you're actually sitting down doing a proposal. You have a call in front of you and trying to figure out what you want to do. Entertainment, gifts and advertising, budgeted for equipment purchased in year 5 of a 5-year project. This is another thing that comes up more often that I would like to think of. So we have a project and you want to buy a computer, and you write in your justification that you need a computer to operate this piece of equipment. But we have 6 months left on the project, and you have $8,000 left, and you want to spend $4,000, or you want to spend $5,000 on this really nice laptop or this really nice computer that you'll use for this equipment. Well, the agency is going to say, what did you use for the first 4.5 years of the project? Why do you need it in the last 6 months? Were you just trying to spend funds that weren't spent on other things? So typically our Folks over in SPA will not let you spend that. There always are exceptions. I just worked on a big project, and we were going to buy a lot of equipment in year 5 of the project. And that was because in the first 4 years, they were trying to figure out exactly what piece of equipment would do what they needed to do in year 5. And if you write that in and say, this is what we're going to do, and in year 5, we're going to run all of these scenarios, and this is what we need, then it makes sense. But if you just get down to the last 6 months of your project and have money to spend, buying a piece of equipment is not a smart use of those funds. Here is another just another glance at that simplified grant budget. And then the highlighted area here is cost share or match. That is sometimes required by sponsors. I was looking at another RFA today, and it's the Department of Energy, and they're requiring a 20% cost share. So for every dollar that DOE will give us, K-State has to put in 20 cents. So match or cost share is just the portion of the project that's not paid for by the sponsor. So that's funds that the university has to come up with in order to get the funding from the agency. Many calls that I work on, many funding opportunities don't require it, but then there's others. I've worked on proposals that require a 1-to-1 match. So for every dollar the federal government gives us, we have to come up with $1. Those are very difficult, usually, to come up with match. But if we include match, we do it just like we do our budget. We have to itemize it. We have to tell how it's going to be used, where the money is going to come from, why we need to include it. So it's just basically a whole nother budget. And when I help you do a budget, we will have 2 budget sheets. We will have one budget sheet that the sponsor, that we're asking the sponsor with, and we'll have a mirror budget of what we're going to provide. And they'll be over the same periods. And there'll be the budget, and there'll be the cost share budget. Cost share can come from the university. It can come from third-party groups. On federal awards, we cannot use federal funds for cost share. So that would have to be state funds or private funds. It would have to come from somewhere else other than federal funds. Here's what a budget with match on it would look like. So you can see that we just have 2 budgets. It would be over the same period. The sponsor budget, the match budget, and then the total budget, how those kind of go together. Most agencies will let us include indirect costs on the match budget, which is nice. After we put a budget together, then we get to write a justification. We get to write a narrative and say, this is why we need the expenses, this is how we calculated them, and this is what they'll be used for. So it's a narrative of the budget, and it helps the reviewers understand that you've thought through what you need and why you need it. So you can see here too that we've put together, or that I've put together, their salary is $100,000 over 12 months. We're going to charge 2 months of summer salary. We're going to include fringe benefits, and so we're requesting $21,833. Why is it needed? He's going to act as the principal investigator, and he will be responsible for, and then you list out what his responsibility will be on the project. This kind of goes back to what everybody's been talking about. We need to be clear. We need to be consistent. If you have a budget with one number and a justification and another, a justification has a different number on it, your reviewers are going to start questioning your attention to detail. How much have you thought about this? If you can't get these 2 numbers right, should we trust them with the research? And so it's part of my job as a grant specialist is to help you make sure all of that adds up and comes out correctly. It should be in the order of the budget. So we have the budget, lines, justification lines. All of this, putting a grant proposal together, is to make it as easy on the reviewers as possible to see what you're wanting to do and how you're wanting to do that. It's the same thing with the budget justification. There'll usually be a budget template. We put the budget numbers in the template, then we take that template and we write the justification in the same order. So as they're going down side by side, it's easy to follow, it's easy to understand what's going on. If match is required, we do the same amount of detail for the match as we do for the sponsor request. And you might have a page limit. NSF gives you 5 pages. So you have to think this is an additional place for you to tell your story. Doesn't mean you have to use all 5 pages, but it is another place where you can add information about your project and what's needed and how it's going to work. Here's a justification for supplies. We request $12,000 annually for laboratory materials and supplies. I get this often. As a reviewer, are you going to think that they really thought through this very thoughtfully? Have they planned this out? Do I know if what they're wanting to buy is allowable? These are all questions that could come up from a reviewer when you write such a general statement for materials and supplies. That's often a time where faculty will put extra money in materials and supplies. And it's, I think, a place that reviewers also will question of, have they really thought through this? Some of my faculty members that love budget justifications will come up with something like this and will send this to me. I'm going to do 192 samples and here's all the things that I need to run that sample. Reviewers don't want to see this, but it makes me feel good as a grant specialist. Wow, they've really thought through this. They've looked up the prices of all of the inputs that they're gonna have. But we're not gonna put this out there for the reviewers to see. We're gonna put something like this. So this very top line is what was in that whole slide before. In year 1, we're gonna run 192 samples at $81.40 each, and so that total is $15,629. And so we can put together something like this that really shows reviewers that we've thought about what we're gonna do, the tests that we need to run, how much they're gonna cost, but we don't need to provide the reviewers with the detail on the previous slide. And then I'm not going to read this to you, but here's a bit more of a justification that can really tell reviewers, I thought about what I need. Here's some places it tells you even that we've looked at Fisher, VWR, we've looked at places and these are the places that we want to buy these supplies. And so it really can tell the reviewers, this is what we need, this is where we want to buy it. And so you can give them a better idea that you've really thought through this budget and what you need. Just to kind of pull it all together, the budget and justification is critical to the big picture of your proposal. If you spend all your time focused on the narrative and don't do the budget, the reviewers will notice. So I suggest, unlike everyone, the budget really kind of needs to come first. If you get me off your back, we do the budget a week, 10 days, 2 weeks before the proposals due. We can get that out the door. We can get that to pre-award. And then that last 2 weeks, you can spend nothing but time doing your narrative and your scientific part of the project. And so I guess I can't stress the importance of starting the budget early. Ask questions often. It's way easier to get the budget right and fixed on the front end than it is 3 days before, when you would really, I would hope, like to be focused on the scientific stuff. Let's get the budget, the justification out of the way early, and then you guys can focus on the scientific narrative. So that's all I have. If you have questions, can answer them now. If you have questions afterwards, I'm happy to help you, or you all will have a grant specialist somewhere on campus that can help answer questions, give you budget templates, walk you through the process. Yes.
So you are talking about some surplus of the project, say you are running 4 years project and you have 6 months left.
Mhm.
And you have unutilized $10,000 money. So what is the smart use of that surplus money? What is the rate of that?
If you're going to the end of the project, you can always contact the program manager and say, hey, I have $10,000 left. I would like to run these additional 200 samples. Is that okay? And if you can get the okay with them, we can expand. I mean, we can ask for a modification that Amy talked about earlier. We could get a note to cost time extension for you to be able to use those funds. There's also, I mean, the best thing is just to communicate with your agency and say, I have these funds remaining. I have been hitting all my markers, and you know, this part of the project was cheaper than I expected. Can I use these funds instead to take the grad student with me to this scientific conference to talk about our findings? And so the best thing to do is just be in contact with the agency, be upfront with them. I have these extra funds, but have a plan for them when you call or you ask. This is what I want to do. Is this okay? Don't just call and say, hey, I have $20,000 left. What do I do with it? Have a purpose for those funds. Have something that will benefit the project. And most likely, then they will say, yeah, that's great, use it. And then that will give you the go ahead to do that. Mm-hmm. Yep. It's just what it's kind of skin in the game. It's what the university puts up as their part of the project. So the federal agency or the agency, whoever we're working with, doesn't want to fund all of the project. They want more bang for their buck. And so it's the funds or the resources that the university puts in to match what the federal agency has. The easiest thing to cost share is faculty time. So if a faculty has a 12-month appointment and they have a research appointment and they have time available, they could commit time, part of their research appointment, to this project, and we could calculate their salary as match. In the College of Ag, we work with lots of commodity groups, wheat commission, soybean commission, organizations like that, and they want to see research go farther as well. And so we can contact them and say, hey, we've got this award for $25,000. We need match on this project. There's overlap in the project. Is it okay if we use these funds as match? We have to get approval from that agency to use those funds as match, but that's another source that we can use for match. If you have a budget with match, it's very important to start early because it takes more time. Mm-hmm.
You start your research, your proposed research, and you find new area of interest, which is not in the budget. How do you justify that?
Really, you have to use those funds for the scope of the project. If you're going down this road and all of a sudden you hit a roadblock and this no longer works, you contact the program manager and you say, hey, I'm doing this. I've hit this roadblock. This no longer works. Can we go this direction? At all times, be in contact with that program manager, your point of contact at that agency, and let them know what's going on, because the more they're in the loop, the more likely they are to let you or to help you figure out how to use those funds. Yes. Probably she just didn't include it. Every NSF budget has a standard budget sheet and justification. So I didn't look through those, so I'm not sure.
It may have been to for the privacy of investors. But if you want to see what an NSF budget one that you can look at on the research budget, on the research page. We have sample budget.
And I have, like, if you're putting together a proposal, I have a draft justification. So I have a template kind of that I start with. And so it's got some general language that we just craft to start that project. And then if you're the PI, I'll highlight areas and I'm like, okay, you need to fill in. Because I can write about the $100,000 worth of salary, 2 months, your fringe rate, but then you need to tell the reviewers what you're gonna do. So, is that it? Okay, thanks.
Okay, so I'm between you and getting out of here, so I'll talk fast. This really is me this time. My previous slides were Mary Lou's. I'm going to talk about how your proposal, once you have gone through all the trouble of getting it submitted, is going to be reviewed. So I said before in answer to a question, the kind of review you get depends on what the opportunity was and where you sent it. So these are the various kinds of review that your proposal may undergo. So there may be a preliminary review by a staff person who is just making sure that you followed all the rules, that you used the right font, that there's the right number of pages, that it actually fits the funding area that the agency's mandate is to cover, and so forth. That might be a first step review. Generally then there is a peer review, which is someone else who works in the area, one or more, and these people are not part of the funding agency. They're outside faculty and researchers, just like ourselves. Sometimes these peer reviews are conducted in a panel where you go and stay at the agency and meet as a group. Sometimes those are done electronically. Sometimes peer review is just done as a one-off where they send you something to review and you send a written review back. Some private funding agencies like foundations sometimes use, instead of a peer review panel, they'll have some kind of expert consultant who is reviewing the proposals they get. And then usually as the last step in a review process particularly by the government agencies, there's going to be an agency level review that is not so much about the content, it is about whether the proposal in question is appropriate for the mission of the agency and its priorities. How well does that fit with that? And then they may do a separate scrutiny of the budget. And what's happening then is they're saying, okay, well, we got all these content review proposals that have been recommended for funding. We got 10 of them, but we only have enough funding for 7. What we might do then, and you get this kind of games going on, is that we might ask these 5 proposals to reduce their budget by some proportion, and we can fund, now instead of 7, we can fund 8. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff that happens after the content review. So all of these steps is the reason why there is that horrible black hole time period when you are waiting after you submitted your proposal before you hear anything back. And, you know, you may be frustrated at the end because all you get is we're not going to fund you, and they don't send you any comments back or anything. And that's just really annoying. That happens the most often with private foundations. With federal agencies, of course, you're always getting written reviews Okay, what are the criteria for budget review? Anne went over this very well. I will very quickly repeat. Basically, it needs to be based in reality. It needs to be well justified, and it needs to fit with what the program rules are. Okay, the worst thing that will ever happen to you as a researcher, it has never happened to me, thank God, but I know people that it has happened to, is that you work for months on a proposal, or maybe you work for weeks, or maybe you work for days. If you work for days, this is more likely to happen. You submit it, and within a few days you hear from them and they say, we are returning this without review. And then you go, oh my God. Okay, and why is that? Well, most often it happens because you didn't follow the instructions. That's why I started before with saying the most important thing to do first is read the FO, the funding agency announcement, or the RFP, or whatever you call the thing. Also, the case that I'm the most familiar with where somebody's proposal was returned without review was that someone read it, and it was a proposal to NSF, and the person had used, I can't remember what word it was now. It was a fairly innocuous word, but what they thought was that it was too health oriented, and NSF does not fund health related research, NIH does. And NSF is pretty fussy about that. So he was very careful not to use that word again when he resubmitted. And he got funded the next time, so there was a happy ending to that story. Another reason why it might be returned without review is you missed the deadline. Okay, you didn't turn it in on time. You waited until, 4:45, it was due at 5, and there was a glitch in the system, and it didn't get there. That's also a nightmare. And then there's other kind of stupid reasons why you might get returned without review. Sometimes there's 2 stages of a proposal. There's a preliminary proposal, and then they will conduct a preliminary review, and they will select some that they want to see full proposals from. And if you went ahead and submitted a full proposal anyway, even though you weren't invited, they're not going to review that. And then the other thing that's kind of taboo, and you have to be very transparent about this, is you are not allowed to submit, with a few exceptions, the same proposal at the same time to multiple agencies. There is a part of a proposal that we haven't really talked about much today because it's kind of a nuts and bolts thing, called current and pending support. And that's where you have to disclose all of your current funding as well as all your pending funding. So that's another reason why you might get it kicked back to you, is if you went ahead and submitted the same proposal to NIH, USDA, and NSF all at once. Don't do that. Yeah, then here's more ways to go wrong. Don't follow the instructions in many different ways. Don't follow the solicitation. You just send something in you wanted to late. And then something else, they will catch it if you have previously submitted it to the same agency, it was declined once, and you didn't substantially revise it. The same people may be reviewing it the second time, and they will figure it out. Okay, so what are the steps? This is kind of an NSF-centric timeline, but it's reasonably true to all the other agencies. And it kind of fits with that timeline that was in Mary Lou's slides earlier. So in phase 1 is the part you're doing. That's the preparing it and submitting it, and we're optimistically saying you took 3 months to do that. Phase 2, it's gone. The agency has it, and they are going to do the blue steps. They're going to pick reviewers. They're going to do the peer review process. The reviewers usually have a few weeks once they get their proposals to review them. There will be some kind of a submission to the program officer, whether it's a panel meeting or whatever, and the program officer will then recommend for funding or recommend to be declined. And then there will be the final kind of agency review. And that's the award processing phase, which is the orange, phase 3. And that can happen, can take at least a month after you hear that they're going to fund you. You're waiting and waiting and waiting. I'm ready to start my research. Where's my money? Well, they're doing the final nuts and bolts business review and getting your award out the door. Okay, so we have heard several times today about NSF proposal criteria for review without actually spelling out that they have these very specific things. And if you ever submit to NSF, you will have to address both of these in the proposal. You have to address the intellectual merit of the activity. In other words, how is that advancing knowledge in the field? And then the second review criterion, and it's just as important, is what are the broader impacts? And so what that means is that it's the potential to benefit society in some way and contribute to some desired outcome. So what are those things? So here's intellectual merit, the kinds of things that fall under that. So it's, you know, advancing knowledge in that field or in related fields. Part of the intellectual merit is, can the proposer actually do the work? Are they qualified to do it? Is it original? How organized and well conceived is it? Does it make sense, or is it a mess? If it's a mess, that's going to knock down the intellectual merit. And then this is something that was addressed by Amy, is there sufficient access to resources? So if you're proposing something that needs, you know, a supercomputer, and you haven't made plans to use one at another site, they're going to say, how are you going to do that work? So that would be an example of insufficient access to resources. Broader impacts are a little bit harder for most people to wrap their arms around, but there's ways that they can be accomplished. And one is through the project itself. Okay, so you're doing cutting edge research on a new form of transportation that will protect the environment and reduce friction across cities. Okay, so the research itself could lead through breakthroughs or improve, solve societal problems. You can also have activities that are directly related to the research. Okay, so most people use this as, oh, I'm going to be training graduate students or undergraduates or postdocs as part of this research project, and they will then go on and contribute to the field. And then there's a third category, which is activities that are complementary to, okay? You're going to develop a new course. You're going to do a workshop for pre-college. You're going to put up a display at a museum that will educate the public about the research. So those are all ways to do broader impacts. So those will be reviewed using criteria like this, which cover the many ways that broader impacts can be accomplished. And I'm not going to read those to you. You can look at them later. If you're interested in submitting to NSF, so some of you may be interested in the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship opportunity, for example. Read this again when you start working on your broader impacts. Okay, so what is NSF going to give you back? And this was related to the question back here, how many reviews earlier. You're going to get verbatim copies of the original reviews that the panel did. And there will be at least 3 of those on your typical NSF panel. And sometimes there's more. It just depends. Sometimes they bring in extra reviewers, particularly if there is a big discrepancy between reviewers on the panel. They may bring in an external reviewer for a 4th or 5th set of comments. And they are scored from excellent, very good, good, down to fair and poor. And the reviews that you receive will specifically address both of the review criteria, intellectual merits and broader impacts. And then they're supposed to summarize the strengths and weaknesses of your proposal. If there was a panel, you'll also get a copy of the panel summary that was written at the panel meeting and everybody agrees to. And then you'll also get in the cover email this context statement where they tell you, you know, this was reviewed by a panel, there were 51 proposals discussed, and X number were recommended, and that kind of thing. If you propose to NIH, they have 2 levels of review. There is a peer review, just the same idea, and they have a funky scoring criterion. It's backwards. They do from 1 being the best to 9 being the worst. Don't ask me why they do that, but they do. And so that's the typical thing. They comment on all the stuff you'd expect they're going to comment on. And then what's going to happen is that the mean score from everybody that reviewed it on the panel is going to be calculated and multiplied by 10, giving you a score that they will send you between 10 and 90. Okay, that's only if your proposal was discussed at the panel. There is an unfortunate stage called not discussed, which are about 30% of the proposals that they decide is the bottom tier, and they will not be discussed further. You'll still get written reviews, but you won't get a score. You'll get a summary statement then that the program officer writes that will give an overall set of comments as well as those individual scores. And then they give you something else, which is a percentile for that particular study section, which is the panel at that meeting. So if the study section scored everybody between 10 and 30 and your score is 25, chances are that your percentile is not that good. So it tells you about how you stand, because just the score can be confusing. Okay, that's the first step. You will get those reviews in the mail after several months, but it still has to go through another set of hoops, assuming you were scored and assuming you had a good score. And that is that the advisory council or the board, which are, again, external experts, but also representatives of the public. And what they're going to do is that, you know, sort of agency level review where they're going to look at all the impact scores of all the proposals and look at the summary statements, and then they're going to compare those to the priorities of that portion of NIH. And then that the NIH is divided into institutes and centers. You don't need to know that much information, but the director of that unit will determine whether things are going to get funded or not. And then this other thing you sometimes hear about if you're around a lot of researchers that have NIH funding is so-called pay line. And that's where people are betting on whether a particular percentile score is fundable or not. And that's kind of based on historical information. USDA NIFA is the other big federal agency that we have a lot of funding at K-State. Their proposal mechanism is similar to NSF's. They have a panel manager who is at NIFA, and they're usually on a temporary appointment, and they will lead a panel of reviewers, and there's a peer review, written reviews and scores, either the letter scores like NIH or sometimes numerical equivalents. They'll discuss and they'll determine how they want to rank, and they'll have a cutoff, and only the higher ones are going to get funded. And then all of that stuff is coming back to the PI and with a funding decision. Okay, so where do these agencies get the reviewers? So they're going to want 2 kinds of reviewers, and some of that again depends on what the opportunity is. So obviously there's going to be specific content expertise represented. And then there may be, you know, sort of more breadth, general knowledge, and it depends on what kind of a panel it is. So the program officer may be recruiting people based on their knowledge. You know, they go read papers in the field and they see who's publishing and so on and so forth, see who's speaking at meetings, the usual ways. Some proposals ask you to list potential reviewers. They also may invite people that you have cited in your reference section. Some of them appoint people to multi-year service on panels, and then others are all ad hoc, where people are just invited on a one-off basis to serve. So it's apples and oranges for who is going to be your reviewer. But one thing that all reviewers have to declare is whether they have any conflicts of interest with the proposer or the institution that the proposer is at. So generally, someone from your same university is not going to be reviewing your proposals. Someone that was your postdoc advisor is not going to be reviewing your proposals, generally. And also the other thing is, and I alluded to this earlier, everybody who serves on a panel is expected to hold the proceedings in confidence. They are not allowed to share the proposals they read. They're not allowed to talk to people about them. Why do we search so hard for prevent conflicts of interest? Because the government wants peer-reviewed to have that reputation, to be above board and honest. It can't look corrupt. And that achieves the second purpose, which is to preserve the trust of the public, of Congress, who does the budgets, and the scientific community in general, to believe that everything is being done in a fair and above board way, and there's not favoritism. Okay, so funding decisions are made by those program officers. It's very important to communicate with your program officer because they control your fate, and particularly if you want to change your budget. And Amy told you before that the awards are made either through grants or through a contract agreement, which is more formal. And there's a lot of conditions that come with an award, and they assume that the institution has the capability of managing their grants. And also they look to see if the agency is on time and submitting its reports. Okay, so you've submitted your proposal, it was reviewed, you get your score back, it's not competitive, you've gotten your reviews, and you're really depressed, and you open them up and you read them, and why are you going to find out it was declined? Well, it wasn't considered competitive is you know, kind of the overall reason, and the program office agreed with the reviewers. There may have been flaws in the proposal that were identified, but actually the most common reason is the third one. There just wasn't enough money to fund all the meritorious proposals that were received in that round. And that is the unfortunate reality out there. So if you get that decline, should you revise and resubmit, or should you know, leave science entirely and go become a bartender? Well, that's kind of up to you, but don't let one failed proposal knock you out of science forever and never submit again, okay? The average success rate, even for really good researchers, is way less than 50%. So, you know, it happens to people all the time. My lifetime percent success rate is maybe 30%. So you've just got to expect, it comes with the territory, that if you don't succeed the first time, talk to the program manager, talk to your colleagues, get some people to read your proposal, give you some suggestions for how to approve it. Hopefully you'll have had a good review, or I mean a thorough review, and you will get comments that will help you improve it. that they will have identified your strengths and said, you know, this is good, this part is good, keep this, but these things need to be addressed. Get somebody to read your proposal and give you thoughts. I mean, it would have been better if you'd gotten them to read it before you submitted it, but sometimes you just don't have time. And you can ask your program officer questions. They may or may not answer in the detail you want, but it's good to get in touch with them and let them know that you still want to pursue the idea. Okay, so if you got lucky and you're funded, yay, why was it funded? Well, obviously it reviewed well. It looked like it was high impact research. Sometimes you're going to get funded because you're in a special category. You're applying to a program that's just for young investigators. Okay, those are a little less competitive than general open calls. Sometimes you're going to get funded because you're in an underachieving state in terms of federal funding. Kansas happens to be one of those underachieving states. And because Congress recognizes that, they've established these special programs called EPSCoR and IDEA that have particular funding mechanisms only for people in the underachieving states. So you have you have a better chance of applying to one of those programs and succeeding. If you're at a undergraduate, primarily teaching institution, they have special programs. Career is an opportunity that NSF has, and it's only for early career faculty. So, you know, those things can increase your chances, especially when you're starting out. You also may have had a strong case that the research will have a very strong impact on the university or on your state, for example. Suppose you're, you know, getting funded by USDA for research that has a huge impact on the wheat industry. Well, that's good for Kansas. It's good for the country. They're going to want to fund your work. You also may have designed something that was really clever for your broader impacts that is designed to increase the diversity of the research population or maintain an educational impact. So those are all possible reasons why you might have gotten picked. Okay, so I'm going to make a distinction between a good proposal and a competitive proposal. So to be funded, you have to be good. You have to be at least good. Okay, but it's not necessarily enough. Come on. A competitive proposal has all the attributes of a good proposal, plus it's going to the right opportunity, it followed all the directions, and it did all of the things well. I mean, you can't just do some of the things well, you've got to do them all well, pretty much. And here's all of the things you need to do well. What makes a proposal competitive? Okay, you've got to show why it's important. Funding agencies don't want to see incremental increases in pushing back the frontiers of science. They want to see quantum leaps. Okay, so at least you need to make it sound like you're going to do more than baby steps. You need to talk about why this is really going to make a contribution. You need to be very succinct and write things up well and clearly so everyone can understand it, even if they're not an expert. You need to show that you know the field and have experience in the relevant methods you're going to be proposing. You've got to talk about what would be next. What are the next steps? I addressed this before when we were talking about the writing, that at the end of the proposal, you can say, you know, this is going to springboard off to this. And it needs to be an amount of work that you can do within the time frame. If you propose 5 years of work and your budget is only for 3 years, reviewers are going to figure that out. So don't do that. And it needs to be in sufficient detail so people can understand it. Okay, so that is the end of the slides, and I'm happy to address any questions if people still have them. And if not, I'm going to thank you for coming and staying through the workshop. We hope that you have learned useful things. Everyone who spoke here today is happy to help answer questions. My office, the Office of Research Development in Fairchild Hall, is open to you. We are, appreciate getting questions from people about proposals. We're happy to help you. So, and as are the specialists in your colleges. College of Ag has a grant specialist team of which Anna's a part. College of Engineering also does. Amy was from Vet Med. And then Laura Hohenberry in Arts and Sciences is also happy to help people with proposals. If you're in a college that I didn't mention, pre-awards and my office are the ones to approach. So thank you and have a great rest of your day. Stop the share. I'm gonna let you put this thing to bed.